it's just learning. He's just going through a learning process, because so far he's been able to do whatever he wants, and all of a sudden there's these boundaries, and it's just as calm leaders being like, hey, like, I know you want to do that, it's not okay, here's something else you can do, or then there's a punishment. And dogs learn in two main ways. It's something I tell everyone: positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. It's super simple in the sense that dogs will do something. If it yields a positive result, they'll do it again. They'll do it again. They'll do it again. If it yields a negative result that's strong enough, they'll stop doing it. General rule of thumb is, if they're doing something and you've told them off, right? And I'm using quotation marks, because it's like, if the telling them off is an inconvenience, then they'll do it again. But if the telling them off leads to a punishment, they'll learn to stop doing it. So essentially, what I try and teach people is understanding how to communicate with your dog. So what often happens is, like, the dog will take the food or will steal the can or whatever, but there's no punishment or disciplined moment, and then the dog learns, when I do this, there's a negative consequence for my choice. And so a lot of what I try to teach is about choices. Teach the dog what you want, show the dog what happens if it does something that you don't want, and then it's up to the dog to make the right choice for whatever it is that you're trying to show it. The running off, it's something that you just have to develop over time, the trust, and him knowing, like, when I run off, there's a really severe consequence. So I generally recommend to everyone to have a crate, even if it's outside, because it just gives you a boundary that if you are wanting to, leave the house, and not even as a punishment, and you want to leave your dog without worrying if it's going to do anything, it goes in the crate. And then also, if the dog is misbehaving, you have an escalation tactic, which is like, okay, cool, you've made that choice. I've taught you not to do that. You've made the choice to do it again. In the crate you go. Punishment is losing the freedom, right? And so it's the same with the dog, in the sense that if he does something and there's no punishment or consequence, he's just going to go, well, that was like, nothing happened, I'm just going to do that again. But you got a dingo cross cattle dog. So, if you had a little spoodle here or something, or a little pug or whatever, I'd be like, you could probably get away with more. And they're not properly worked, as in like challenged, and when they're not properly maintained, like, he'll run 2 doors down and kill the chickens. Like, I've had cases like that because the owners, they just don't know. And particularly with these sorts of breeds, you want to be more vigilant about that stuff. Dogs learn positively and dogs learn negatively. And so for us as leaders, we need to have clear lines of positive communication and negative communication, because the dog doesn't understand, hey, don't do that, or I'm so upset that you chewed the pillow, or whatever it is. The dogs just understand simple communication. And the way I like to communicate to dogs, and the way I encourage clients to communicate to dogs, is the way dogs communicate with each other, which is, if they like each other, they give affection, they lick each other, they might spoon and cuddle or whatever. If they don't like each other, or they're asking for distance or space, they growl. So we'll call that, as humans, the verbal correction, which is like a or a hey or a no. If the dog doesn't listen, they use touch, which is, they nip each other or they bite each other. And so for us as humans, I like to use just a little bit of touch to interrupt the dog's brain, or, as you may do on the leash, corrections on the leash, and then spatial pressure. So the way dogs kind of show each other who's boss in the dog world is through spatial pressure. They'll sort of stand over each other, and one will go, okay, cool, like, I understand the message you're putting out here, or they'll fight back. And so I like to tell people, like, pick the communication methods that work for you. I'll show you what I think is valuable, and then you pick what works for you. And I don't tell people what to do, I just give people options. And then the same thing is on the other end of that spectrum. And so generally speaking, with new clients, I always encourage them to do what's called an affection detox, where you go for a week or two just starting to notice and become aware of the moments that you give your dog affection. Because affection for a dog is, other than food, the greatest reinforcer. And so what tends to happen, I'm not saying you, this is just generally speaking, is the dog does something wrong and the human goes, stop that, you're such a bad dog, thinking we're communicating with the dog, but actually we're telling the dog, I agree with this behavior, I encourage you, and then the dog thinks, oh, you actually want me to do more of that. And this is gonna, you'll see once this becomes illuminated for you, it's in everything. You know, you might notice it with the kids, for example, that you've just told the dog off and then they'll go and just pat the dog. As a parent and as a leader of the pack, it's just getting better at educating them as to why. And then what I find really valuable with kids is then the bonus of that is then telling them when the moments to give affection are. So like now, he's just calm. So if there was a little kid here, I'd be like, now go give him lots of affection. Rather than when he's like chewing the can or pacing around, you know. And you'll start to notice if you affect and reward calmness, your dog will become more calm. With a space like this, you know, I would be doing a lot of practice here rather than thinking like I need to take my dog out. I would be doing a lot of my work here because you have a beautiful, really great training ground, low level distractions, you don't have cars, people and all that stuff, and it gives you more of an opportunity to really work with the dog. That to the next level and actually use that, because in that moment you're teaching him, I want you to wait for your food, but you're not teaching him anything else. And so how do we utilize that moment to actually go through a process of teaching him? The number one thing that I believe is dogs don't eat for free, which basically means, so it's the principle of what you're saying, like in order to have your food, you have to sit down and maybe wait for a few minutes. But my whole thing is like, cool, take his whole breakfast with you to the beach and train him over the hour, you know, and I'll show you today sort of what that can look like. And then same in the evening, rather than giving him the bowl, go through a little training routine with him. And so I'll show you what that looks like and to me what the best case result is. And then you're ticking the box, because when you do this kind of obedience training, you're draining them mentally because they're having to constantly think and process what it is that you want, as opposed to here's your food and now you've got a full stomach, now let's do some treat training. And the dog's like, I could do that, but I'd rather go smell that poo or whatever, And so for me, it's so important that we know what motivates our dog, food, affection, play, whatever it is. Let's use that motivation to teach it what we want. And then the dog gets what it wants because it gets what it's motivated for. And you get what you want as the owner. And ultimately, the most the richest part of this whole thing is that your bond is developing and your bond is growing with now.